Welcome to the Beau Show. Thanks to those of you watching today, and if you're a first-time viewer, welcome. And I hope you stick around for some engaging analysis. Education, that's our topic today. It's so critical for so many reasons. It's not just what our kids are being taught, it's how they're being taught. Gone are the days of learning basic American history, vocabulary, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now, we are in the days of pronouns, Marxist indoctrination, and critical race theory. There has been a dramatic shift in education, not the least of which concerns public versus private schools, charter schools, and school choice. The pandemic added an extra wrinkle in all of this with remote learning, which took away a great deal of the social aspect of schools. Now we are obviously witnessing the chaos of returning to in-person education as it gets phased in different ways. And just like the pandemic bottled us up so badly that we saw outbursts of emotion from being locked down and muzzled and forced to do things that, restricted our freedoms, we are now seeing parents in particular speak out. In school board meetings across the country, parents are reasonably upset that their kids are not getting the best education because indoctrination has taken precedence over education. Earlier this week, the embattled Loudoun County, Virginia School Board experienced a rather raucous meeting over transgender school policies. Now, Loudoun County is in northern Virginia, very close to Arlington, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. It is very affluent. And as D.C. elitists have moved into the county, it has turned rather blue, with Joe Biden winning about 60% of its vote in 2020. The Loudoun County School Board is comprised of 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So that should give us some insight into the politics. This recent school board meeting followed weeks of protests by many parents who are calling new school policies left-wing indoctrination of their children, affecting things like restroom accommodations, privacy, and the requirement of Loudon public school employees to use preferred names and pronouns. Now, while an official vote isn't scheduled until August, 259 parents signed up to speak at this board meeting, which is a testament to the fever pitch that these policies have come to. One of the speakers at this meeting, who identified herself as the mother of a transgender Loudon student, was booed after saying, quote, "Hate was dripping from the followers of Jesus in this room," end quote. Well, that was obviously aimed at the Christian parents in the district who feel that transgender discussions should be held at home and not in public schools. The board had to call a 5-minute recess to cool things off. Multiple parents asked the district to drop its appeal of a court order to reinstate teacher Tanner Cross, who was suspended after speaking out publicly against the proposal. They argued that fighting the judge is a waste of taxpayer money and doomed to fail. A former state senator lambasted the board for its treatment of this teacher and allegations that some progressive residents had organized a list of conservative residents to publicly harass and shame them. At that point, the meeting erupted in cheers, to which the board then voted to shut down all public commentary. The large conservative group there then began singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Several residents were arrested at this meeting as they refused to leave before being heard. These 2 parents were protesting against the new policy as well as critical race theory, and they wanted to be heard, but they were removed and arrested. Ian Pryor, a Loudoun County parent and spokesperson for the group Fight for Schools, said that parents who are against these indoctrinating policies are not being given a seat at the table when it comes to the discussion of these policies and how controversial subjects are taught to children. Pryor said that the group's goal is to start a movement where parents have a say in their children's education, that the school board can't just railroad over parents and have it their way. This meeting follows an incident in which a Christian student was confined to a small room during school-wide periods of transgender-themed lessons that his family had objected to based on their faith. Of the 259 people that had signed up to speak at this week's meeting, only 59 were heard, which gives credence to the argument that discussions are getting shut down. And I think it speaks to the frustration that many parents feel across the country and how their kids are educated. Loudon County is ground zero of this debate. One of the Loudon High School teachers talked about this education versus indoctrination dichotomy, in which she described how she's witnessing the impact of critical race theory in her own students and how the student body is suffering. Listen to how this teacher, Monica Gill, describes it. She says, quote, "Our education leadership denies it, but equity is critical race theory dressed up pretty. It sounds lovely, equity, but it is poison, because equity is not about equality of opportunity, which is foundational to American political culture and economic strength. It is about equal outcomes, which is foundational to Marxist political ideology." End quote. Gill spoke of how many of the white students are being told to check their white privilege, or would even be excluded from certain conversations merely because they are white. Listen to what this parent, who grew up in Mao Zedong's China, had to say to the school board in an earlier meeting.
I've been very alarmed about what's going on in our school. You are now training our children to be social justice warriors and to loathe our country and our history. Growing up in Mao's China, all this seemed very familiar. The communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race. During the Cultural Revolution, I witnessed students and teachers turn against each other. We changed school names to be politically correct. We were taught to denounce our heritage. The Red Guards destroy anything that is not communist, old statues, books, and anything else. We are also encouraged to report on each other, just like the Student Equity Ambassador Program and the bias reporting system. This is indeed the American version of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The critical race theory has its roots in cultural Marxism. It should have no place in our schools.
I don't know if there's a better explanation than that, because this is coming from someone who grew up in China and understands the Cultural Revolution. See, people in America think that can't happen, that communism is some faraway threat. Well, many don't even think it's a threat. And you know why? Because they haven't lived through it, like this parent. When she describes how the Loudon County public schools are merely substituting race for class, she outlines how divisive these policies are and how they are rooted in cultural Marxism. The board, of course, denies that and just says they are just trying to be inclusive. But that's the point. Inclusivity and equity are positive words. They carry positive connotations. But no one sees the insidiousness of them because they divide rather than include. To this parent, Mrs. Van Fleet, she says that to her and to many Chinese, it is heartbreaking that they come to America to escape communism and now they're experiencing it here. And it's true. Communists would destroy any relics of tradition. It should serve as a stark warning to us. Listen to this mom in Carmel, New York, tear into her school board.
I think the Board of Education and those sitting on the panels are thieves. I think they're liars and have committed treason against our children. Stop indoctrinating our children. Stop teaching our children to hate the police. Stop teaching our children that if they don't agree with the LGBT community, that they're homophobic. You have no idea each child's life. You don't know what their family lifestyle consists of.
See, parents have had enough. They're tired of the thought police. And where one time it was just trying to police adults' thoughts, it's now bleeding into the educational system. This harkens back to my recent episode in which Roger Waters of Pink Floyd denied Mark Zuckerberg's request to use his song "Another Brick in the Wall" for an Instagram campaign. I focused an entire show on that because the song spoke out against certain types of indoctrinating education. You know the line, "Hey teacher, leave them kids alone." But the problem is that no one is leaving our kids alone. Zuckerberg and big tech are using highly influential social media to indoctrinate as well. But it's also part of the education system and curriculum. You've heard a lot about systemic racism, but have you heard about systemic indoctrination? When you begin compelling teachers how to teach, which is rooted in cultural Marxism, you have a systemic issue. You may recall that Dr. Jordan Peterson came to prominence when the Ontario government was compelling him to use certain pronouns and verbiage as he taught clinical psychology at the University of Toronto. It's not that Dr. Peterson minded actually using the term that a student might want to be called. It was the mandated compulsion by government to regulate his speech. That's what his beef was. And so now, what happened in Canada is happening here. But it's all rooted in Marxist theory. And I refer back to Nikita Khrushchev, secretary of the Russian Communist Party, who said this: "Your children's children will live under communism. You Americans are so gullible. No, you won't accept communism outright, but we will keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you will finally wake up and find you already have communism." In the book The Naked Communist, written in 1958 by Cleon Skousen, he outlines one of the goals, which is the following. Goal 17, get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Get control of teachers' associations. Put the party line in textbooks. Wow. Do you know what Goal 15 is? Capture one or both of the U.S. political parties. You need to know a few more of these rules. Goal 40, discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. Goal 41, emphasize the need to raise children away from negative influence of parents. Attribute prejudices, mental block, and retarding of children to the suppressive influence of parents. Do any of these sound familiar to you? Have you seen this happening? On June 2nd, parents of Loudoun County filed in federal court, arguing that Loudoun County Public Schools and its, quote, Equity Student Ambassador Program restrict eligibility to non-white individuals, and they require that they hold certain views about social justice. It also targets a bias response system designed to flag perceived microaggressions or other incidents of bias between students. Doesn't that sound exactly like what Mrs. Van Fleet was talking about from Maoist China, where students could publicly shame others if they don't comply with party policy? This is no longer a fantasy or a stretch. It is reality. The Loudoun County middle schooler was placed in a very small room adjacent to the dean when his parents objected to transgender lessons at the school. Video of that room shows just how small it is. Take a look at this. Now, if as a parent you didn't want your kid to be indoctrinated with this type of lesson, and he or she was relegated to this room, wouldn't that almost seem like punishment or detention? It's like an isolation chamber almost. I think at the root of all of this is compulsion, coercion, and manipulation. The idea that if you don't think a certain way, let's say by agreeing with a person's lifestyle or using their preferred pronoun, or that we all aren't oppressors, then you're bigoted and that you hate them. That is some kind of insidious mental abuse right there. It's one thing to teach social lessons that educate kids how to get along and work alongside each other, because we have to do that on a daily basis. You know, teaching that hitting somebody in the arm is not an acceptable social behavior. But to say you must use certain verbiage and must not just agree with, but love someone for being a certain way, and if you don't, then you should be ashamed. Well, that's manipulative and has no place in schools. But it's part of a broader agenda. And when you think about critical race theory and the notion that any white student, for instance, should feel ashamed or outcast or unworthy, that's abuse. That's not history. That's indoctrination and scarlet letter level stuff. I think back to what that Loudon County mom, She Van Fleet, said, that after coming here from China, she said, the real privilege, and we hear that word a lot these days, the real privilege, she says, is living in America. Not white privilege, but American privilege. And yet, here we are having tense school board meetings because boards all across America are adding ideology to policy under the veil of equity and inclusivity. It's done by the media, by entertainment, everywhere you look. And there's a huge difference between teaching the noble value of treating each other equally with dignity and respect and colorblindness, but it's quite another to compel speech and thought. And it's falling outside of the home. You can't send your kid to class without this kind of education. It's not American history, it's anti-American history. It's not calculus, it's calculated. Rather than critical mass theory, it's critical race theory. Rather than learning how your subject agrees with your verb, it's about how your pronoun makes you a better person, and setting that precedent so that anyone who doesn't comply get shamed or bullied into submission. It's not the races to the finish line that matter, it's the race of the person. It's not physical education, it's body positivity education. It's not arts education, it's diversity in arts education. It's not science as the ever-evolving study of things, it's science to silence. It's not social studies, it's socially corrupt studies. It's not sex education, it's sexual promiscuity and gender fluidity training. It's not about honoring the privilege to be American, it's all about white privilege. There comes a time when we have to stand up, when we are being pushed around. This is not the same classroom you and I were in as a kid, but it is your kid's classroom now. And boards don't want you to have a say in it. If we sit back and allow these micro-scale policies to take place at the local level, and notice I didn't say microaggression, the woke term du jour, then we are being sheep. This could be the beginning of a movement, a push back against school boards who railroad over parents. Brainwashing a child in their most vulnerable learning period is an insidious act. But it's not just insidious, it is intentional. There is great intentionality to all of this. It's the wolf dressed in sheep's clothing. The brainwashing being done in the name of benign inclusivity and equity. But we are fools if we allow it. This was not the intent of our founders. Free speech was, however. Having your say was a critical part of our infant country. But telling people how to think was not. So what do we do? Well, I think the right path has begun, which is exercising the right to speech by demanding public hearings and voicing opposition to brainwashing. Also, supporting governors like Ron DeSantis of Florida, who see the oncoming storm and begins to rally the troops by banning certain kinds of brainwashing. And also he prevents schools from accepting foreign money from places like China, and also installing education policy that promotes American history as a product of American heroes, not American villains and oppression. It's actually quite important to do this because each school board is different, as is every city council and local government, and then district and state leadership. Having a proactive, smart governor like DeSantis ensures that schools stay doing what schools are supposed to be doing. Virginia, infiltrated with a DC attitude, is going to reflect a progressive ideology. And that can doom a school district. We've already seen teachers' unions be bullies. So now we add to that the doxing of those who share merely a traditional logical approach to education. In Iowa, the ban on critical race theory goes into effect July 1st. They did this because about 9 agencies who advise public and private schools. One of those agencies, the Mississippi Bend Area Education Agency's April and May presentations titled MBAEA Equity Department Meetings, Anti-Racism, heavily cited critical race theory authors Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi. Here's one of the slides from their presentation. Take a look at this. Once Fox News began investigating this, public access to these slides was revoked without any explanation. This was what prompted Iowa to act. Now notice how covert this was. It makes its way as ideology, not history, from advisory agency to school board. And look at how this indoctrination is happening, not just in our schools, but in our corporations, such as Coca-Cola or Woca-Cola. It's a top-down policy that is the product of communist-style goals. As I mentioned earlier, don't take my word for it. Take that woman that spoke at the school board, who lived through the Cultural Revolution. She's not an ideologue. She's speaking from the heart. She's sending out a Paul Revere-style message that we are in grave danger of losing our kids to propaganda. And many out there thought it was just so wonderful and so cool that Joe Biden's wife, Jill, was the great Dr. Jill Biden, a community college educator. Where is she on this? Her silence is compliance. I believe that education is such an important issue because it lays the groundwork for everything. If they get away with pushing this on kids, they've won. It's game over because adults will just go along with it. The money needs to follow the child. The way to create equality, not equity, is to give every child an equal chance and let them choose the school. The parent and the child make the decisions, not the bureaucrat who is doing the indoctrination. Watch how this man, Ty Smith, with 2 medical degrees, describes CRT at a board meeting.
When you talk about critical race theory, which is pretty much going to be teaching kids how to hate each other, how to dislike each other, that's pretty much what it's going to be. That's pretty much, I don't care what you say, it's pretty much what it's going to all come down to. You're going to deliberately teach kids, this white kid right here got it better than you because he white? You're going to purposely tell a white kid, oh, the black people are all down and suppressed. How do I have 2 medical degrees if I'm sitting here oppressed? How do I get, when it all comes down to it, the person that's going to be suffering from this, the one's going to be hurt from this, is the kids. 10 years from now, if this stuff goes on, whose fault is it going to be? Whose fault is it going to be? Who we going to look back on and blame for this? Because this is stuff we're talking about right now. This stuff is going on right now. I do this stuff on a daily basis. I'm in the hood. I'm in the communities. I'm out there with folks in their face. I've been doing this stuff since I was 18 years old, talking to black folks. And you know what? None of them are buying this nonsense. None of them are. But if you want to implement this into the school system, I guarantee you to the day that I die, I'm going to be the very person right there debunking stuff, tearing stuff down, letting them know they can do exactly what I did and get exactly where I am by putting themselves to work and getting there. And ain't not one white person ever going to keep any of them from getting there. So the CRT stuff, BS. This
is the kind of fight we're going to have to get our schools back. The good news is that the tide may be turning. States are taking action. 58% of Americans have an unfavorable opinion of critical race theory in a YouGov Economist poll. The fight is just beginning, but things are looking pretty good. These truths are self-evident. I'm Beau, and that's the show.